The world is changing continuously. From the time of the early caveman to the modern world, we have witnessed many changes, some of which have come on slowly, while some have brought in a rapid change. While it is impossible to list out all events that have shaped our world, there are some moments in history that stand out because of the effect they had on the entire world. Let us take a look at some of these defining moments in history. Number 11. The Black Death. In the 14th century, between the years of 1346 and 1353, many parts of Europe and Asia were scared to wake up every morning, because losing someone they loved had become an expected news and not a surprise. The reason for this rampant death was the Black Plague, or the bubonic plague, which had belittled the cost of life. It was responsible for wiping out 30 to 60% of Europe's population, and 100 years passed before population growth could resume. But the marks it left were permanent. The massive deaths due to the plague resulted in many problems like a shortage of labor, but this was a blessing in disguise. The low number of workers meant they could choose work, get better pay, and serfdom almost disappeared. It was a golden age for workers, and when things went back to normal and feudal lords tried to bring back the old ways, they were met with widespread revolts. Another thing that the Black Death led to was the breaking down of the absolute power of the Catholic Church. Number 10. Fall of Constantinople. Constantinople had been the seat of the Roman Empire for a long time and was considered the center of the world. But when in 1453, after a 53-day siege, it fell under the pressure of the Ottoman Empire. It marked a shift in the powers of the world. It was the one event which marked the declining fortunes of Christianity and the rise of Islam. Constantinople changed from a center of Christianity to a stronghold for Islam. It marked the further expansions of the Ottoman Empire into Europe, and was one of the first times artillery was used in combat. It was the one even which marked the end of the Byzantine Empire and led to the end of the Roman Empire, which had stood strong for 1,500 years. And it also marked the end of the Middle Ages. Constantinople became Istanbul and remained the capital of Turkey till 1923. Number 9. The U.S. Civil War. While many of us think that the American Civil War was limited to the USA, and it was, but its effects were far-ranging. From 1861 to 1865, USA descended into a war between the Union and the Confederacy, and a victory for the Confederacy, who considered slavery to be a normal way of life, would have been a huge setback to human rights all over the world. Slavery was an accepted thing in many parts of the world till then, and it was only the victory of the Union that began the change. The Union restored the Republic, and slavery was abolished, which served as a major blow to the global slave trade. Today, as African Americans and whites stand together, they have to thank the Union for winning the deadliest war that the US has ever fought. Because if it had not, the world today would have been very different. Number 8. The Medical Revolution. Falling sick was considered one of the worst fates before the 19th century because it meant death was lurking around the corner. But then, the 19th and 20th century saw remarkable advances in medicine as brave and enlightened men and women started studying the human body in an effort to cure many diseases that were considered fatal before. Be it Louis Pasteur, whose work with germs led to the development of cures for many diseases, developments of vaccines for life-threatening diseases like polio and smallpox, Alexander Fleming's discovery of penicillin, or the myriad developments in medical sciences, we can never be thankful enough to this golden age of medical science. Number 7. The Industrial Revolution. Much of the world that we know has been a result of massive industrialization, and all of that can trace back its roots to the industrial and technological revolution that took place between 1760 and 1914. The Industrial Revolution began in Britain as a natural progression of the Renaissance, and it soon spread to other parts of Europe, especially after the French Revolution. It was the beginning of the wave of capitalism, and new machines led to the factory system of production, which started with the cotton industry. Steam engines, hydraulic presses, and other mechanical innovations took a hold of the world, and new ideas were no longer discarded out of the box. The modern workplace was born because of the Industrial Revolution, and even though it led to an increase in exploitation, it did give rise to the modern age. Number 6. Gutenberg Printing Press. Perhaps the single most important invention in the last 2,000 years was the Gutenberg printing press in 1440. It was single-handedly responsible for the spread of education. Before the revolutionary press, books were copied by hand and were very expensive. Thus, they were not for the commoners, and it was only the rich who could afford this luxury. But all that changed with the Gutenberg press. Books could be printed in a fraction of the time it took earlier, and it encouraged people to read and educate themselves as the prices of books dropped. And it was not just education that was affected by the press. Political pamphlets also became possible now, and that helped shape many social reforms. There is no amount of thanks that we can give to the Gutenberg press, because it literally took civilization one step further. Number 5. The Renaissance. When the world was reeling from the after effects of the Black Death, the rebirth of civilization was heralded by the Renaissance during the 14th to the 17th century. It was a time when ignorance and superstition gave way to arts, literature, and science. And it was a time of great minds questioning the very basics of our world. Some of the greatest minds that we know today, like that of Da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael, came into prominence during the Renaissance. The distinguishing features of the Renaissance culture were its anti-feudal, secular, and humanitarian worldviews, and it awakened the world and marked the beginning of the modern era. Number 4. Assassination of Archduke Ferdinand. Even though Europe, and with it the entire world, was prepped for war in the early part of the 20th century, there was one trigger that started the World War. It was the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand III in 1914, the heir to the Austrian throne, by a Yugoslav nationalist that caused Austria-Hungary to declare war on Serbia. Soon, other nations joined in and started declaring war on each other till it ballooned up into the First World War. The Great War, as it was called, led to the death of 9 million people across the globe, and many empires crumbled in the process. In fact, it would not be wrong to say that even the seeds of the larger and much worse Second World War were planted during the First World War. The Great War marked the use of lethal weapons like tanks and chemical weapons, which led to the widespread horror that the war brought on the earth. Number 3. The October Revolution. During the First World War, there was a momentous event that changed not only the course of the Great War, but also of the world. It was the first successful socialist revolution which gave rise to the spread of communism in the world. In October of 1917, the autocracy of the Tsar in Russia was finally overthrown, and a provisional government was set up in Russia. And then, a second revolution, led by Vladimir Lenin, overthrew this government to set up a communist rule in Russia, and gave birth to the USSR. These two revolutions together were later responsible for changing the tide in the First World War, setting the stage for the Second World War, rise and decline of fascism, rise and spread of communism, and the Cold War as well. The October Revolution also served as inspiration for many power struggles in the world, like the ones in Cuba, Vietnam, China, Hungary, and many others. Number 2. The French Revolution. The French Revolution, which took place between 1789 and 1794, paved the way for many changes in the world. It was the reason for feudalism giving way to capitalism, and set up the stage for many uprisings all around the world. There was much hunger and poverty in France because of the emptying of the treasury that led to a lot of anger against the monarchy. In turn, the massive uprisings across France led to the birth of the Republic, and it paved the way for Napoleon Bonaparte's coup and the many wars that followed. It completely changed the scenario in Europe and the rest of the world as well. The French Revolution paved the way for many historical and social transformations, and is one of the most monumental events in history that has given rise to the world as we know it. Number 1. The Second World War. Just decades after the Great War had ravaged the world, a bigger war broke out. It was the Second World War, and it lasted from 1939 to 1945. The Second World War saw the rise and eventual fall of Adolf Hitler, whose crimes against humanity cannot be justified by any logic. Nazism and fascism had polarized the world, and many countries of the world aligned themselves either in the favor of the Axis power, which included Germany, Italy, Japan, and the Allied forces which included England, France, and later on the USA and the USSR. The war left its mark on almost all countries in the world and was the cause of 50 to 80 million deaths. It also saw the execution of 11 million civilians in the Holocaust and ended only with the deployment of the first nuclear bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. There were many atrocities that were committed during the war. From the Pearl Harbor to Auschwitz, humanity has perhaps never fallen to lower standards than it did during the Second World War. It also led to breaking down of the Europe dominion over the world as new world powers took its place. These monumentous incidents in history have left a mark on our world, and while some may be for the better and some for the worse, there is no denying that there is much that all of us can learn from these events. Do share your thoughts on these events in the comment section below, and remember to subscribe to our channel for updates on all of our latest videos.